All right, we're going to do a demo on drawing a still life with multiple objects. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our picture plane. And we're just freehanding the picture plane. And the objects are going to be simple shapes, continuing on familiar shapes. So what we want to do is we want to think about the middle of our picture plane. And we want to think about what we call the horizon line when we're thinking about where, say, the wall and table are going to meet in our composition. So we can either bring that line up and then the objects are going to fill up 2/3 of our picture plane on the table, or if we bring that down midway or even a little bit lower, then our objects fill the space above. So I'm going to choose to bring that line down. If this is our midpoint, I'm going to bring it a little bit below that. So I'm going to establish that down here. And I'm just lightly drawing it because I want to set up my composition. So I like to use things like spheres, cubes, cones, things that that I'm familiar with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a cone So I'm just lightly sketching. And then I'm going to place a sphere right here. And then I'm going to have my box It's always good to draw through the form that's overlapping so that we get a more natural feel to the structure. All right, so there's 3 objects. And just for impact in my piece, I'm going to place another object. I'm going to do another cone. I'm gonna make it smaller, and I'm going to have it back here, and it's going to go off the edge. And then I'm going to put another ball up a little bit higher. So that 2 is a little bit smaller, and it's going to be coming from behind the cone. All right, so we've got this established. Everything's established. We're going to take our eraser and we'll get rid of some of the lines that we don't see. So that means that as this cone overlaps the ball, we can get rid of this side of the ball that's behind the cone. We want to see the line where the table ends and the wall begins right about here. And we'll erase some of these lines that are up here. So now I'm pressing down just a teeny bit harder so that you can see the lines a little bit better. And I'll go ahead and take out some of the box that's behind this sphere. And now I'm going to refine Now, when you're selecting objects for your still life, yes, you can go to a store where they sell styrofoam spheres and cubes and cones, and that would be fine. You could get those and set a still life up and get your spotlight out and light it and use that as your premise for your piece. But you could also choose other objects, so they don't have to necessarily be these. I think these are great to help you to understand in my demo how to construct multiple objects in a composition and some of the things that you can look for. But you might have things around the house that could take the place of some of these that are still representing some of these simple shapes. So one of the shapes that I left out that I think is a great shape to put in is a cylinder. So let's say, for example, you looked in the pantry and you have a oatmeal container that is a nice cylinder shape. That would be something that you could put in there. And also, instead of something like this, you could find a box also in the pantry. Maybe sometimes you can buy, a little box of cereal. So maybe you set the oatmeal container next to a box of cereal on its side. And then for the sphere, maybe you find an orange in the fridge and set that there, or even an apple. I mean, that's also has a rounded form as well. And they'll still act the same as what I'm doing here in the demo. All right, so my light source is going to be coming from this side over here. So I'm going to draw an oval, and we've done this before when we were doing the light and shadow principle. So our spotlight is coming from above, and we know that we want direct light, indirect light. We want our core shadow. We want our cast shadow, and we want a reflective light. So I'm going to have a shadow coming down on this half of my sphere. I'm sorry, on my cone. So I'm going to go ahead and shade in. Also, I'm going to have the shadow going across the sphere with a slight arc. So what I want to do is I want to mask in my overall value. This whole side of the box is going to be in shadow. So again, I'm keeping my hand pressure rather light, and I'm not spending too much time on the shadow other than to sort of, as I said, mask it in or just sort of lightly place it in, because I need to establish my cast shadows. So we're going to start with the shadow on this sphere, and then we're going to think about the cast shadow that's coming off of that. So that cast shadow is going to go off to the edge of my paper. And it's the shape of the sphere. So it has this roundedness to it here and here. My cone is going to do the same thing. So my cone is going to be casting a shadow coming this way, but it'll also be coming off this way. So we can shade all this in. But now what we want to look at is we want to look at the cast shadow that's coming off the ball. So it's going to be coming across this way, but it's also going to be coming across this way. So it's here. So here's the ball, edge of the ball. Here's the cast shadow. And then it changes direction just a little bit to follow this edge. So now we're going to shade all that in as well. So see how these shadows get a little bit more complex as you add more shapes. Because if you have a shadow coming off of an object like this, overlapping shadow that's not only on the form of the cone, but also the cone itself has a cast shadow. So now you're going to have overlapping scenarios with each of these shadows, and they all connect. So there's going to be a little bit of a difference in terms of value as we start to look at the overlapping of those shadows. And that value that I'm talking about is happening in here. This is closer to the object, therefore it's going to be a little bit deeper in its value. All right, there we go. Now we've got a cast shadow coming off this box. So it's coming across here. But it's not going to interfere with the light that's on this sphere. So this shadow is going to go behind the ball. The box is going to cast a little bit of shadow on the cone, and it's going to curve like this just above the ball. And then we'll shade this in. And we remember that this is indirect light, so we can lightly shade this, and then we'll leave this unshaded. And then we'll shade this side of our cone. And we'll have the cast shadow of the cone, because this box is in front and the cone is a little bit further away. We're going to have that cast shadow of the cone going behind this box. So it's not going to interfere with this side of the box right here directly. So it's going to be going behind. So we can shade that in. So it might hit the side of the box that we don't see. Now we'll build up this shadow just a little bit. And therefore we can start to create the core, where we press down a little bit harder, feather the edge because it's soft. We want it to look like a gradual transition. And the darker we make this core, the lighter the reflective light starts to appear naturally. And then if I go in here and darken the cast shadow a little bit, you can see already the reflective light is starting to glow, and I didn't even do anything to it. I didn't have to get my eraser out or anything like that and go in there and lift it up. So you're dealing with the value of the cast shadow and the core, and that sort of affects the look of your reflective light. Now, the only thing I might do is actually tone that down a little bit. Come over here. Bring the dark value right up to the edge, and then start to carry it down towards the reflective light. And then we'll shade the cast shadow. And I'm going to go back into that cast shadow and shade that just a little bit more. And I'll push back the reflective light slightly. That means I'm shading over it just a little bit like we did over here, so that it's not too light too soon. Don't forget to use even hand pressure and go over areas several times with gradual buildup. So you can see I'm making this cast shadow a little bit stronger. Like we said, it's closer to the form. So it's going to have that feel to it. So as we're carrying our core down, we don't want to forget about the indirect light, which is up here in the light area. So we're just going to lightly carry a little bit of shading into the light area. Not only are we softening the edge, but now by putting in this little bit of value, it helps us to see the indirect light. And then we'll strengthen this cast shadow. And we'll lightly go over the reflective light, just slightly, not too much. Here we go. Now we can get into our cast shadow over here. Make it darker, closer to the cone. We'll push back some of this reflective light. So I'm shading over the reflective light. I don't want it to be too dominant. Darken up the core a little bit more. Carry that right into the cast shadow coming off of the sphere. Let's add a little bit of indirect light into our cone. So the indirect light is always darker than the direct light, but never as dark as any parts of our core, reflective light, or cast shadow. We'll add some indirect light over here. We already added some indirect light on top of the box right here. And then the last thing we're going to do is get into our back object, which is another sphere. And we'll bring down that core. Tone down that reflective light just a little bit. And then add a little bit of indirect light. So I'm just taking tiny little lines and carrying them in of value. And there we go. So that's it in a nutshell for our composition with multiple objects. I'd like to see you guys use 4 to 5 objects. So I'll let you choose. But I'm more concerned about placement and composition. And then I'm also concerned about your light and shadow and the cast shadows and how these forms interact. As far as the background goes, you might choose to just leave the table and the background as is, but it's not a bad idea to do something to one or the other. And so I'm choosing to do something to the background with a light value. And what that does is it just sort of takes away all of that stark light value and helps to emphasize the direct light and indirect light that's on our objects. So there you go. So what I would do in my piece, and you guys are going to spend, I would like you to spend a good 3 hours on this drawing from life. Use your camera on your phone to take some photographs of the still life, just to get an idea of placement and composition, because remember, this is your picture plane. So you could crop the still life from several different vantage points. You know, right now, my eye level is just a little bit above. What if my eye level was a little higher? What if my eye level was a little bit lower so that the objects were more at eye level than they are right now? What if I was a little bit more over on this place looking at the objects? Or what if my eye was coming from over here and I cropped it so I see more of this side of the box than I do in this composition? And then you can play around with the background too at the end, and you could make the background darker next to the lighter parts of the object and lighter next to the darker parts of the object. So on this side, if I kept it a little bit lighter, this will appear darker, and vice versa. If I darken this up a little bit, this will appear a little bit lighter. So I'm going to leave that up to you guys. I'm going to end our recording, but I appreciate you watching and learning, and I can't wait to see your wonderful drawings.